respect that, but it is now a couple of years later, and I would appreciate it if the jury is still out, whether or not it's just better surveillance, especially in light of what Autism Speaks has discovered in South Korea. The 1 in 38 study that they funded makes it very clear that when you go further into a study, into the weeds in terms of asking the right questions, more rather than less seems to be the case. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that South Korean study. We never saw a prevalent spike like we've seen on autism in Africa as we have seen in the last 15 or so years.
Now, the numbers that he pointed out earlier, that it used to be 1 in 10,000 kids got autism, it's now 1 in 88. And I'd like to ask Dr. Boyle why. And I don't want to hear that we have better detection. We have better detection, but detection would not account for a jump from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 88. That is a huge, huge, huge jump. What other factors could be part of making that happen besides better detection? Take better detection off the table. I agree we have better detection, but it doesn't account for those numbers.
So just to put it in context, better detection is accounting for some of it.
Right, I know some, but what other factors? I don't want to hear what other factors.
Our surveillance program counts cases of autism and establishes the prevalence. It doesn't tell us all the answers to the questions as to why. We've tried to look at what's changed in the environment of things that we know are risk factors for autism, things like preterm birth and birth weight and
Well, are you looking at vaccinations? Is that part of your studies?
So let me just finish this one.
I have a question. Are you looking at vaccinations? Is that part of? Pardon me?
So there is a large literature, as I mentioned.
Are you having a study on vaccinations and the fact that they're cramming them down and having kids have 9 at one time? Is that a call? Do you have any studies on vaccinations?
There have been a number of studies done by CDC on vaccinations as well.
Could you send them to the ranking member and the chairman here? I must have had 50 different parents write me or come to me and say I had a healthy child, yet then they had 10, 9, 6 vaccinations at one time, and that child changed overnight and was knocking their head on the wall, and it was a changed child. In fact, I had a family in my office today where the mother broke down crying, saying my child was wonderful, bright, precocious, talking. She took those vaccinations and the child became very incredibly sick and has never recovered. But why do you have to cram 9, 6 at one time when the verbal evidence seems so strong from so many people that they had a healthy child until they got vaccinated?
And that's why I don't know that we're spending enough time and energy looking at this where our kids are getting twice the shots of everybody else. And I just have, my sons, it seems like they're older now in their late 20s, but they might have had 7 or 8. And I'm just going by people that I represent in our area that feel strongly that this has to be looked at in a very, very aggressive way, that if we're over-vaccinating our children. And I'll doctor either one of you.
42,000 lives were saved. 20 million cases of disease were prevented, and 13.6 billion in direct medical costs were saved.
When you put all these drugs or vaccines into children, the impact that these various vaccines might be having in combinations, that's the number I got.
I don't have a specific number. I'd be happy to provide additional information for the record on.
But I think it's 2.3 million, and they say that it cost the country. I didn't realize it was to this magnitude, $137 billion a year in annual cost this country for care of autism. Do you agree with that number? Either of you?
Again, I would not have the data to agree or disagree. I know that it's a high number.
Okay, well, I just want to let you know we've got to spend more time and resources and fix this problem because it's obviously out of control.
There's something wrong. And the gentleman, I thought, asked some very good questions. As a matter of fact, the whole panel. When you've got this combination of shots, and you go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 88, it seems to me somebody would say, wait a minute, let's put the brakes on this. Just look at, whether the multiple shot situation is causing this. And I wish you could see the people behind you. They're grown men that have been crying behind you, and women crying. And it's just so I just hope that we can. You hear the frustration coming from here, and I'm just sitting here and I'm just saying, wait a minute. It just seems like somebody would say, is there something? Maybe there's an issue here, and if we're going to err, let's err on the side of keeping children safe, even if we have to, do a pause and get one shot a day. Thank you very much. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
If I may take a liberty of the chair for a moment, it is our intention to include in future hearings, and the gentleman from Indiana is here, a narrow but specific request, and I put both of you, even though you may not be the witnesses, of the question of drug interactions where the FDA approves individual drugs and individual vaccines, but by definition does not necessarily thoroughly study interactions of any sort that can happen with 1, 5, 9, 20 different ones. That's a different hearing.
We've heard a lot about the 1 in 88 number. I come from a state where it's 1 in 47. I've heard a lot about this from my constituents, and I've always been an advocate for responsible funding and research for NIH to try to figure out what's going on with this issue. Can any of you tell me about any new therapy approaches that are emerging for effectiveness in treating autism?
There's certainly some therapies in terms of behavioral interventions and other kinds of things that are emerging, that are being developed. In terms of something like a medical therapy, I think we're much farther away from those kinds of interventions, though one would hope that eventually we would have those to offer as well.
Why did the FDA and HHS take thimerosal out of all the children's vaccines except just the 1 or 2 or 3? I mean, I'd just like to know why they took the thimerosal out if there was no problem and leave it in just a couple.
I think neither of us are vaccine experts, and we'd be happy to look into that and provide additional information.
Well, I'd like to have an answer, because I think most people would really like to know.
One of the witnesses told me that the fugitive doctor had been involved in a couple studies with CDC, and I have information here that he was involved in 21 of the 24 studies. And I would like to submit that to the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Again, I'd like to... Do you all solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I have carefully viewed and all answered in the affirmative. Please take your seats.
I'm here because of my grandson, Christian, who's now 11 years old. And my daughter, Katie, is sitting back here, and my wife, Suzanne. And he was a boy that was 2 years old, and we thought he was very precocious. He seemed to be brighter than average. He walked early. He had enormous vocabulary, and then he lost everything. And I'll tell you, without any secret, that my daughter, firmly believes that vaccines were the relationship that triggered him into this pit. So we lost a little boy that we knew. It wasn't like he was a disabled person who got more disabled. He was a boy, and we lost him. And I sat at meetings similar to the meeting you're having here, where I would ask questions about autism. I went to universities, I went to medical schools, and I got the worst answers imaginable. Actually, I heard some of the same answers here just a few minutes ago in the panel. They must be they're on a Twitter thing or something.
The Autism Society is about helping people today and preparing them for tomorrow. And we believe that government services, if funded by government dollars, should have focus on advancing an individual's quality of life in measurable and meaningful ways. We need to re-examine how government services can be provided, not on a limited definition of services, but rather based on an individual's needs. The need for adult service is extensive. When you talk about a fiscal cliff, the greatest cliff that occurs in our community is that when a person turns 21 and absolutely no services are available for that person when they need.
A piece of information just came to my attention. The Senate just passed the TRICARE Amendment, restoring all military personnel ABA therapy, whether retired or in service. It's taken 5 years to do that. 5 years.
Before 1930, the rate of autism in the world and in America was effectively zero. Today, nearly 70 years after Connor's paper, reported autism rates are 1 in 88. In New Jersey, 1 in 29 boys born in 2000 were diagnosed as autistic. What's going on? Why are so many American children sick? I think we have to face reality. We need to be clear. Autism is a public health crisis of historic proportions, worse than poliomyelitis. It's devastating a generation of children and their families. We need to face that reality. Autism is a national emergency. The old surveys, they looked for everybody, and they couldn't find people. They didn't miss 99% of the children with autism. It's not hard to find a child with autism. It's obvious when they're autistic. The notion that we're just doing better diagnosing, even in the CDC studies, they're using the same methodology. So when you see those numbers rising, that's not because the methods are changing, it's because there are more cases. Many of us believe CDC has actively covered up evidence surrounding autism's environmental causes. NIH, meanwhile, has received the lion's share of funding, money they've wasted on status quo research and gene studies. It's absurd to focus on genetic research in this crisis. There's no such thing as a genetic epidemic. We need accountable new leadership on autism at NIH and CDC. We need an advisory committee that believes in combating autism, not newly stocked with appointees who actually oppose that mission. We need a Combating Autism Act that truly combats autism. We need to stop investing in the autism gene hunt and identify what has changed in the environment that it could possibly have injured so many children. The scope and the magnitude of these changes, it's complicated, yes, but it can't be that complicated. There have to be a very small list of things that could have changed.
Vaccinated versus unvaccinated.